This is Householders' Options to Protect the Environment, Hope Incorporated Australia. We engage with citizens and communities to help achieve better, responsible environmental protection and stewardship locally, nationally and globally. We work from and adjacent to the traditional lands of the Gayabal, Jadawa and Yugara peoples of southeast Queensland, and we acknowledge our deep respect for the inspiring protective nature stewardship carried out by First Nations communities around the world for thousands of years.
It will open up the possibility of a sustainable lifestyle where we are insulated as much as possible from the effects of climate change and any global economic disruptions that occur. We have left our run a little too late to cap planetary heating below 2 degrees. But we can help everyone insulate themselves from its effect. We can help them survive climate change with some degree of well-being and political agency. The Australian public interest collaboration may be our only opportunity to achieve that. So if anyone out there can help us set it up, please contact ACFP.
Hello and welcome. This is the Imagining 2040 Pathways to Flourishing Futures podcast, and I am your host, Andrew Nicholson. In today's episode, we're joined by Dr. Bronwyn Kelly of the Australian Community Futures Planning Initiative. Dr. Kelly is one of Australia's most original thinkers on how this country could build fit-for-purpose democratic capability for the challenges of the 21st century. Across her books, By 2050, The People's Constitution, The Public Interest Economy, and in the vision document Australia Together, Dr. Kelly has described an ambitious model of collaborative citizen democracy for this country. One of her core insights is that Australia's traditional government-centred decision-making systems are no longer sufficient for navigating complex problems such as climate disruption risk, growing social inequality, increasing ecological decline, and the threats to long-term economic security. She argues that only by integrating the public directly into long-range planning through structured, transparent, participatory frameworks can Australia generate the kind of joined-up, future-ready strategies these highly challenging times demand. Dr. Kelly's vision for a better form of future citizen inclusive democracy in Australia and how it could be achieved aligns closely with the vision of the Imagining 2040 podcast. Our aim is to create a collaborative digital public square, a place for collective imagination, informed debate, and exploration of better futures. Dr. Kelly's work aligns well with the sort of citizen-led democratic innovation we hope to amplify, and she offers a process by which we can ensure citizen-led forums operate efficiently, to offer democratic design plans which will maximise our chances of arriving at the sort of 2040 that Australians have said they want. For these reasons, it is a particular pleasure to welcome Dr. Kelly into the Imagining 2040 podcast conversation and to hear more on her ideas about how Australia could build a more resilient, more inclusive and more genuinely democratic future by 2040 and beyond. So, a warm welcome, Bronwyn.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's wonderful to be here.
That's great. Well, look, let's start our conversation proper by asking you to give us an outline of your professional background, especially as it has shaped your thought leadership within the Australian Community Futures Planning Initiative.
Fine. Well, briefly, my background is that I was a senior public servant in state and local government for 30 years in New South Wales, until I retired in 2014. In that career, I had the opportunity to develop policies and processes to foster social cohesion and environmental sustainability and democratic involvement for communities in decision-making. It was a wonderful privilege to have that career. I was especially lucky to be working in local government when reforms for community engagement in long-term integrated planning were legislated in my state in 2009, and I had the privilege of working with local communities to help them use that planning process to articulate the sort of future they want and to build plans to make it a reality. Again, a great privilege. So many local councils across Australia now use that integrated planning and reporting process or something similar to increase the involvement of their communities in local decision making. And having seen the value of that at the local level, I decided when I retired to see if I could adapt the local integrated planning and reporting process so that it could be used at the national level. So the idea was to see whether IP&R could be a useful, or it could be as useful to the broader Australian community as it was to local communities, to help them select the best policies for national issues like economic management, climate change and taxation. You know, these aren't necessarily dealt with at the local level, but they have impacts on the local level coming from the national level. So I decided to see whether we could adapt the process so that it would work at the national level as well. And then eventually, after working out how to adapt local IP&R so that it could become national IP&R, I established Australian Community Futures Planning. And the role of that was to develop and fine-tune the process so that it works efficiently at the national level and is fully democratic and inclusive. The work of ACFP, Australian Community Futures Planning, is largely focused on making the whole process as welcoming for all Australians as possible. We want everyone to become involved in planning the future of the nation if they want to. And we're also beginning to facilitate community involvement in related long-term planning projects. So we're stretching ourselves that way at the moment. And we'll work on that over the next 3 years.
Thanks for that, Bronwyn. And once again, for the opportunity to interview you for this podcast series. I mean, it's really interesting to hear about the sheer extent of your long-term government and planning experience. And it clearly shows why you would be extremely well qualified to talk about community futures planning, which we're going to talk about in a lot more detail as we go through this. So let's start that conversation by looking ahead now from 2026. Can you give our listeners some early thoughts? You've already started to do this, but you're going to extend on it now, on how your work with the Australian Community Futures Planning Initiative can contribute to the goal of making it possible for citizens and governments to co-design national futures in this country on a regular, long-term basis.
Yes, well, if you can put something as complex as that simply, and I think you can, what I need to start by saying is that there is no forum at the moment where communities and governments can co-design a long-term plan for the nation, and that's what we're trying to make possible. So we have forums at the moment like citizens' juries or assemblies or summits, you know, as governments like to call their community engagement programs, where occasionally governments might choose to allow a few community members into a decision process on an isolated issue like productivity, which is the most recent example from the federal government. Or they can use those juries to help choose between a limited number of options for solving a local problem like flooding or water shortages or something like that. But these are not collaborative planning mechanisms. There's no real thinking ahead that goes on in them, no integration of solutions. So at best, they're reactive problem-solving processes, most of which will mean we never really get ahead of the real problems that we're facing, like climate change. We never get a chance to get ahead. So to fix something as big as that, we need a long-term plan, and we need to start well ahead of whatever disaster we might see coming our way. At the moment, we don't start well ahead at all. We're always reacting instead of planning ahead. So the work at ACFP in developing national IP&R, that's National Integrated Planning and Reporting, is so that we can offer Australians a way out of the backward-looking approach. Or to put that another way, it offers a process that can be used by people, that is, by anyone, to build a plan by which they can not just track their way out of current problems, but actually design an integrated set of safe paths towards a particular preferred future, whatever that might be. Or they can design a set of specified outcomes for the society, environment, economy, and democracy they want to find themselves living in at some time in the future. So the national IPNR process is orderly and designed to eliminate chaos and endless arguments in decision making. So on the website, I describe it as an automatic quarrel settler because it requires people to come together to imagine their preferred future, and it gives them a politically neutral framework that allows them to describe the future they want and then to specify the characteristics of policies and strategies that will follow safe paths towards whatever they've described. The ACFP has been pilot testing that neutral framework since we were established in March 2020. And so far, we haven't found any reason why it wouldn't be possible for any individual or group in Australia to use it efficiently to participate in decision-making processes on national issues, something as big as climate change or tax or any of those things. So we call this neutral framework Australia Together. It's a long-term integrated plan with a shell structure. You know, we've worked out the structure for this sort of plan so that it will work. And it's just got a shell structure that people can fill in and amend through successive planning cycles. So these cycles go on for 3 years, aligned with federal elections. You start them at certain points and finish them at other points. They're repeatable, and they start just after a federal election where the plan is built or it's reviewed if it isn't the first, if it isn't the first cycle. And then progress is checked just before the next election to give Australians a report on whether during the term of the outgoing parliament that they elected, did Australia move closer to or further away from the community's preferred vision? So ACFP has tested this process by developing a draft vision for the plan that we call, predictably, the Vision for Australia Together. And that might seem presumptuous, but the reality is that there's actually no way to test whether the planning system will be workable for a whole nation without a draft vision. So we had to put one together. This doesn't mean that I made the vision for the plan up out of thin air, to suit myself. In fact, I did exactly the opposite of that. The Vision for Australia Together was collated by reviewing the responses of Australians since the late 1990s, whenever they'd been asked about what they want for their future in surveys and planning exercises and focus groups and research and community engagement plans and things like that. So it is reviewed from time to time to check that it still aligns with what Australians have been saying that they value about their lives and what they want for the future. It's what the Vision for Australia Together is not what I've said I want. It's actually what Australians have said they want, albeit that I've distilled it down to 17 elements. And I had to do that because it's the only way it can function as a description of the preferred future that's coherent enough to be used for monitoring purposes and reporting purposes. So because of the way the Shell plan has been structured, that's Australia Together, it functions as a map of the safe routes towards whatever vision Australians might want to craft for their future. You could change the vision and the process would work just as well. But all up, it means that there is a safe space in which it is possible to hold orderly and efficient collaborations to select safe paths to the best future we can imagine at a national level as a nation. It does work very efficiently at the national level. We've tested it, and at the moment it's been working, so it's great.
Wow, Bronwyn, thanks for that snapshot vignette of your work. It gives us a really good sense of where you and your colleagues at Australian Community Futures Planning have been and are going. And just really interesting to hear the extent of your ability to put all of that together, to tick all the boxes or the elements that could create a user-friendly, for want of a better term, user-friendly community planning system. And also the fact that this isn't just your own vision, it's truly democratic in the sense that you've tapped into citizen data, from the surveys going back donkey's years into the 90s. And those surveys, those types of surveys are still going on. Everyday Australians expressing their own views about what they want in their country, what they want to see. I mean, there is the democracy in sort of principle. It's just needing to be harvested. And you've harvested that data in helping create this structure in which they could actually deliberate and help in decision-making processes on a more formal basis down the track. So amazing stuff. So, look, we've been thinking about, better forms of democracy in the years ahead. Just, those mercurial what-if questions that we sprinkle throughout these episodes. What if that goal of, that you've just outlined could be achieved, of a better democratic process of community planning? What if that goal could be achieved across the next 15 or 20 years or so? What a vital contribution it would make to our ability to create better, genuinely flourishing futures in Australia. And one such possible democratically enhanced future is where we're going to transport the conversation right now, on an environmentally friendly journey fueled with quantities of very low carbon future vision imagination. So this is our first imaginative exercise of the interview, a time travel trip to 2040 and back. So this time travel thought experiment is always the imaginative heart of each episode. This is where we step beyond the present business as usual world of roadblocks and pushback on credible visionary ideas to describe credible, flourishing future development pathways leading toward the years ahead. And you clearly have done that in spades just within the interview so far. But for the audience out there, if you haven't already listened to the Imagining 2040 series introduction episode, it might be worth checking it out, because there it will give you a better understanding of a core idea that we're using to structure the podcast series here, the idea that there are two basic contrasting major development pathways heading us toward a range of possible futures. That's flourishing and failing futures in the years ahead. And I'm sure that most of us want to be travelling on the first pathway, not the second. And Bronwyn's ideas, I think, are well constructed to carry us there. So Bronwyn, and of course all of our listeners out there in podcast land, imagine now that you have a device that can take you forward into that longer term future to the year 2040, just under 15 years from now. It might land you in one spot, or it might hover you over the future landscape. Either way, upon arrival in your imagined 2040, you sense immediately that this isn't a failing business as usual future, it's a flourishing one. And you know that because you can sense, see, hear, and even taste that it is a climate-safer future world with well-housed, democratically active citizens living in thriving communities alongside equally thriving green bioregions full of nature and wildlife. In fact, everywhere you go in this 2040 future, you are witnessing a form of human development that is occurring with substantial everyday citizen input. Community plan development is now safeguarding the web of life. It is actively strengthening the physical and mental well-being of many more people and supporting the flourishing of other species as well. So, Bronwyn, you've programmed your travel device. You've returned to 2026, ready to share a visionary time travel report with us. What did you see, hear, and feel in that flourishing 2040 future you witnessed?
Well, what I saw is that the aspirations of Australians for the society, environment, economy, and democracy they had said they wanted had become a reality. So what I saw was that the vision for Australia together had become real. I'd woken up in a safe place, in the place described in that vision, and I realised that my kids and grandkids and friends and other family were all happily living a fulfilling life. I mean, they were healthy, they were creative and clever, they were in charge of their own destinies. They could afford everything they needed for a decent life, especially education. They were the next person's political equal. They could have a voice in their own governance that could be heard and respected. And they hadn't been excluded because of their origins or gender or sexual preference. In other words, they'd had a fair chance of maintaining well-being all throughout their lives. And as I looked back, I could see that in large part, that had all come about because, well, one, neoliberalism had been defeated. And then we had also been great stewards of the natural environment. We had collaborated on the international stage to stop wars and slow planetary heating. And we'd had the luck of decent governments who put our health and well-being ahead of corporate profits. And we've done the thing most necessary to bring all our good luck about. We'd collaborated to build a vision of what we'd wanted, and we'd used our democracy in new and well-organised and evidence-based ways to plan a safe set of integrated paths to the vision that we had wanted. And there we were. It had happened. So perhaps that's all a little bit high level. But if you want me to single out one thing that I saw when I was in a flourishing 2040, it would probably be that my kids and grandkids were healthy, happy and safe, and everyone else's families were too. So I saw that we had discovered that no one is safe until we're all safe. And we decided to make sure that everyone could be treated as we wanted our own loved ones to be treated. And I saw we'd made a good fist of using our democracy to its fullest potential to bring that about. So we'd expanded it from relying on mere voting and protest and added in the necessary form of deliberative democracy, that is integrated planning. So we recognised we weren't going to make our dreams a reality without a plan to do that. And we built the plans, we reviewed them, adjusted them where they weren't working, and we'd gone on to make sure that everyone would benefit. So we hadn't relied on a political agenda. We built our own agenda and made governments rely on that. So that's what my report from 2040.
And what a report it is, Bronwyn. Thank you so much for sharing that uplifting report from 2040. I could feel I was there. I mean, I could almost see it myself. I mean, it was standing there beside you, sort of this thing. So inspiring to hear that. And just to say, we have been showcasing here a simple future vision imagination exercise, not for entertainment or to create either a utopian or a dystopian fantasy, but rather to demonstrate how straightforward it can be to start thinking about plausible, flourishing futures and the uplift in people's spirits that it can create. Certainly uplifted mine listening to that vision of a better democracy and society in Australia by 2040. Anybody listening can try out this imaginative thought experiment, and we encourage you to do that. And just to make the point that while the future vision of our various interview guests is imaginary, it is also anchored to their solid professional expertise, as you can hear from Bronwyn so far, their lived experience and their human desire to achieve better development pathways which can safeguard the well-being of the generations to follow. That came out very strongly in that section of discussion you just gave us there, Bronwyn. And we do encourage our listeners to develop their own real-life connected future vision imaginations to help explore some of those intriguing what-if questions that we pepper throughout each episode. For instance, given the better citizen democratic participation vision we are outlining in this episode, what if we could get citizens and federal government here working together on a regular basis to co-design flourishing national futures, to ensure that our national institutions carried out a prime mandate to serve the public good through achieving long-term public interest goals? And what if Such new, genuinely democratic, collaborative approaches could help us think ahead more often, to deal more effectively with foreseeable threats and risks before they come to pass. There's a petrol Bowser conversation for you. In other words, what if we could achieve the sort of community planning outcomes envisaged by Dr. Bronwyn Kelly at a national level in Australia? Okay, now for a quick debrief, because time travel can be more than a little bit fatiguing. I've heard this from other guests. So let's do a quick check-in to confirm we're all safely back in 2026. Bronwyn and the listeners out there, what month and year is this?
It is today, the 29th of April, 2026.
Great. We're safely back in 2026, and let's stay grounded in the present as we explore another way to imagine flourishing futures, and that is by noticing what's already here and emerging in the present moment. That is, to notice existing ideas, activities, events, or initiatives that can be considered as good examples, pointers toward, or signals of better ways of doing development, which, if they were further refined, multiplied, or extended, could perhaps increase our chances to get onto better development pathways. Such promising future signal opportunities can be found in progressive policy proposals, and you've certainly given us a raft already, Bronwyn. Promising trends in well-being, economy adoption, reports of cutting-edge, beneficial new technologies, and in any genuinely fresh, genuinely bold ideas or insights on how to carry out future development which will actually benefit the overall public good. Such signals of the future give us a glimpse of the kind of better world many of us would like to see in 10, 15 or 20 years and beyond. And these signals aren't fantasies from utopia, they're real initiatives happening right now, and they are pointing us toward the possibilities for better times ahead. And Bronwyn, it seems to me that the work of the Australian Community Futures Planning Initiative offers a wonderful range of future signal ideas, which I'm sure we're going to hear more about. On that basis, Bronwyn, and for our audience out there, here's the second imaginative question and exercise of the interview on signals of the future in 2026. Bronwyn, drawing on your professional work interests and networks linked to the Australian Community Futures Planning Initiative, or from your everyday life, what do you see as some of the most promising signals of the future in the way I have described them in the podcast?
Well, I would say that probably the most promising signal is that Australians probably don't realise it, but they've been practising integrated planning and reporting for more than 10 years at the local government level. So it's like they're doing a dress rehearsal for a national planning process. So signals already present in the various state-level initiatives to adopt IPNR, they abound. They're all in local councils who work regularly nowadays to engage with their communities to develop long-term plans. So they've more than got off the ground. It's just, can they adapt it to the national level? Our view is that yes, they can. But that said, look, it's early days. So not many people choose to become involved, and it's likely that a lot don't yet realise that they can become involved in national IPNR, but it is open to them and the process is there. It's been legislated in several states as compulsory for councils to help their communities do this. So it is there. They can take advantage of it if they have the time. But it's probable that if we want IPNR to be used at the national level, we will need to set up forums where it can be used to deal with national issues. It doesn't really deal with national issues when it's used at the local level. So this means that at the national level, we'll need to use citizens' juries and assemblies in a somewhat different way to how we use them now. So we'll need to switch them from being simply reactive and focused on solving a single problem, one problem at a time, to being focused on long-term planning, which is, again, it's different. Proactive, not reactive. We need to slightly adapt citizen assemblies and juries processes to make them forward-looking. So one way we can expand these forums then is to attempt to use them in a national process to secure incomes secure our incomes, a basic income and essential services for Australians, and ensure that that can be matched with fair tax reform so that we feel that, we've got an affordable future, a future that we can finance. So that's the purpose of a proposal in my most recent book, The Public Interest Economy, that I have called the Australian Public Interest Collaboration. It's like a little dress rehearsal for national integrated planning and reporting. So this is a community engagement process that can be structured so that it runs in parallel with another process we might hope the government would take up. It's what I call, this is the Australian Public Interest Collaboration, is what I call the two-channel collaboration between the community and the federal government. And it's a big one, but it's not a difficult one. And local councils can help the communities that they have. They can help their communities run their part of it. So it's an interesting design. If people are interested, you can have a look in the Public Interest Economy to get more detail of it. But what it is a process where Australian communities can be organised to design a universal basic income, design it here, exactly what it should look like so that it's fair. And they can match that with fair taxes, and so that it's economically sustainable for them. So that design process, where the community designs a fair basic income, can unlock resistance in the government to introduce tax reform. And that resistance is stopping them funding our services. So we need to unlock that resistance. This is kind of a trigger to unlock everything that's been locking up our access to essential services. So it gives the community opportunities to work out a deal with the government where they can say, okay, we'll unlock the barriers to tax reform if you agree to fully fund our welfare and our well-being as your priority. So I call this, in the book, I've called it a social New Deal, which might make it sound a little bit like the Green New Deals that some political parties have offered voters in election campaigns, but it's actually quite different to that. It's a deal that voters can offer to government, works the other way around. It's a deal that they like the terms of before they offer it. It's a deal that they design and they can call the shots on it. A deal that gives them income security at a basic level, essential services, and fair taxation all in one. That's the deal that they've never actually had. It's never been offered to them, and it's not likely to be offered to them unless they lead in the design of it themselves. So it's a forerunner for full introduction of national integrated planning and reporting on a permanent cyclical basis. If we can get it going, it lays out a great foundation for ongoing national planning led by the community. So it's really worth a shot. We really should have a go at trying to give ourselves a dry run on how to establish a foundation of equality in our society that gives everybody a chance, an even chance in life to live the fullest life they absolutely want. And this is one way to do it, the Australian Public Interest Collaboration.
Bronwyn, once again, amazing stuff. That future vision exercise and thought experiment, you've just carried out there has demonstrated how identifying signals of the future can be used to help create a much stronger sense of what could be achieved on different development pathways into the future. I mean, listening to you, the breadth of your vision was literally breathtaking. I mean, to the ability to reform our existing national government processes in the way that you've talked about, but it all sounded so doable. Listening to you, it sounded so realistic and so achievable. So again, I think that the value of looking at current ideas, initiatives, pointing to such signals of better ways of doing stuff can certainly help counter the naysayers who may tell us that visionary progress is impossible. By identifying and supporting inspirational signals of the future, just in the way you've done, we could help accelerate progress toward adopting better, more genuinely democratic, citizen-identified development initiatives in the years ahead. So here we go again with a what if question. What if our listeners out there started to actively spot their own progressive signals of the future, those pointers to better ways of doing future development? And what if those same listeners and citizens in growing numbers and alliances worked together to support and draw greater attention to those signals and where possible demanded stronger political action from their governments to support them? Now, as we near the end of today's great episode, let's return to your inspiring vision, Bronwyn, centred around getting citizens and the federal government working together on a regular basis to help co-design flourishing national futures by 2040. Because, sadly, back here in 2026, such visionary and progressive ideas can still far too often be ignored or dismissed by vested interests as being too idealistic, unrealistic, unaffordable, or some other naysaying combination of rejection. This particular challenge of the pushback on visionary ideas proposed to help achieve better development pathways is covered in our series introductory episode. There we outline how manufactured stories, disinformation and propaganda, often put out by vested interests who have a stake in maintaining the status quo, can distort and even hijack the opportunity for calm, balanced and progressive discussion on the opportunities to achieve better futures. In this episode, we are having and have had a calm, reasonable and inspiring discussion about nothing less than the possibility of arriving at a better, authentic, citizen-influenced form of community democratic planning and representation in Australia as a whole. That outcome could provide a far better deal for the national public interest across the board. Many of us would like to see such a system come into existence to improve our own well-being and that of the generations of Australians to follow. We are here also demonstrating that talking imaginatively and sharing inspiring ideas on ways to improve the quality of life of present and future generations can be energising, not polarising. We want this podcast itself to become another signal of the future, pointed towards better democratic futures that use digital technologies, including podcasting, to give greater voice and ultimately decision-making power to everyday citizens. Okay, let's stay a little longer with imaginative possibilities to help counter vested interest spoiling tactics aimed at stalling development which would benefit the greater public good. And let's come to our last imaginative question and exercise of the interview as we start to round off this wonderful discussion. This exercise demonstrates the imaginative idea of taking unlimited assertive actions to achieve flourishing futures, actions which cannot be resisted by vested interest pushback. So folks out there, perhaps don that sparkling imaginative thinking cap one last time in this episode. And to you, Bronwyn, imagine you wake up tomorrow and discover you've gained the wonderful power, shared with many other friends and allies, to enact bold, well-considered collaborative reforms that will greatly benefit our human and more than human communities, that is, the natural world and other species. And further imagine that those reforms cannot be blocked by vested interests. Way. So in that splendid, thought-provoking scenario, just give us some of the actions, and I know you have many of them, that you would take to help steer and speed us toward becoming that better community-planned country.
Right. Well, I might just pick out three. First of all, I would probably work on trying to get governments to understand the truth about how money works in the economy, because our idea of money is standing in our way. At the moment, governments are stubbornly insisting that we can't afford everything we need for a decent life, and we need to persuade them that that is wholly untrue. Money is not a limited commodity. It's probably the one infinitely repeatable commodity that is running around in our economies of the world at the moment because governments print it all by fiat. They just decide. And so it's not limited. And central banks like the Bank of England have admitted that this is true. This is how money is not limited. It's created by government will. So We need more economists in our governments to openly acknowledge that anything we can actually do, we can afford. And until they accept that, they'll keep locking the economy into the neoliberal policies that have caused so much loss of our quality of life. The governments need to admit the truth that our essential services are entirely affordable. And as long as we take care of people and the planet, we will always be able to build a sustainable lifestyle, and we will always be able to raise and share money fairly. So if we keep sticking to the plainly wrong notion that there are financial limits to what we can do, we will always be sold short. We'll be selling ourselves short. That needs to end. Secondly, I'd arrange a program of institutional reform that I've outlined in the public interest economy. In the book, I've described that program as a program of institutional reform based on 6 pillars, but I'd probably concentrate first on just 2 of those. One of them is to get Australians engaged in developing the terms of what I've called a national accord on wealth, welfare and well-being. So this is an agreement that we can devise that sets down the principles of fair decision-making about the economy. It's an agreement we can build between us and elected decision-makers. It gives politicians guidance on how to make economic decisions that are fair and how to involve Australians in those decisions. So this is not a difficult accord to build or a difficult statement to build. In fact, it'd probably be about 1 page in length, not hard. But it doesn't exist at the moment. And while it doesn't exist, we have to recognise that we're doing nothing to encourage governments to be fair. We're allowing them to be unfair, which is really risky. We're allowing them to destroy political equality. So that has to stop. Another facet of that reform program that I'd prioritise is to encourage the federal government to support the establishment of an independent, I stress independent, commission for national democratic engagement and integrated planning. Surprising, me suggesting integrated planning. But this is something that we need so that we can connect Australians with those who run the economy in Treasury. We need a centre of excellence that is the custodian of national IP&R and that can give the community the data it needs to build its plan and prepare reports on progress for Australians and governments. So it should be an independent commission. It should be independent from politics and corporate and other vested interests. And its specialty is community engagement in long-term planning. Doesn't exist at the moment, but we need it. And it needs to help us all be efficient in national planning. So efficiency is essential, not because we're all time poor, although that's part of it, but it's essential because the slower and more cumbersome our planning and engagement is, the more people will feel excluded and the longer it will take to make that vision a reality. It's just a mathematical equation that anybody can make. So, the third thing I'd like to focus on, and probably the final thing, is to help make the vision for Australia together a reality, and not just by 2040, but maybe by 2030. You never know. That's the project I've already mentioned, the Australian Public Interest Collaboration. We can really get started on making this vision a reality sooner than we might otherwise expect if we start with an Australian Public Interest Collaboration. And if we can get that off the ground, even just the communities part of it, so where they design the UBI, it will open up the possibility of a sustainable lifestyle where we are insulated as much as possible from the effects of climate change and any global economic disruption that occur. So there is only so much of climate change that we can hope to avoid now, because, let's face it, we have left our run a little too late to cap planetary heating below 2 degrees. but we can help everyone insulate themselves from its effect. And we can help them survive climate change with some degree of well-being and political agency. The Australian Public Interest Collaboration may be our only opportunity to achieve that. So if anyone out there can help us set it up, please contact ACFP. You know, we are attempting at the moment to engage local councils to help us, but it's early days. This is a signal that's there, but it's an early signal, so we've got to get going. We'll see how it goes over the next year, but all help will be gratefully accepted. So they're my three things that I'd concentrate on just to give it as much of a boost as possible.
Again, Bronwyn, amazing, inspiring stuff. I like the fact that, again, you're bringing your, collaborative planning framework infrastructure along there, but you spent a fair amount of time there focusing on the economy and the future opportunities of the public to get involved with economic decision making. The economy is such I know it goes without saying, but it's such a central, if not the central element of any progressive vision of a new, fairer society where nobody gets left behind. I would really encourage all listeners to seek out your work on that published book that you talked about. And we'll put a link to your work in the show notes. But also there are so many other enlightened economic analyses out there now, just demonstrating that there's more than one way to look at the economy. Neoliberalism has done its dash, and there are many, many other ways of looking at it. Modern monetary theory, just to name one thing off the top of my head, just to make it sound as if I know what I'm talking about, which I don't. But you do, thankfully. So it was great to hear that. So amazing stuff. Thank you for that. And I, again, just to make the obvious point, it is so energizing and uplifting to hear future vision imagination used in this way to point us toward possible actions to achieve better could do and can do futures, as opposed to hearing the long litany of self-serving, business as usual reasons why we can't do future development in genuinely beneficial ways which support the public good. So Bronwyn, as we do come to the end of this marvellous interview, do you have any parting words of wisdom for our audience? A pithy comment which summarises your core messages, or perhaps a suggestion for how listeners can get involved with or support the work of ACFP? You've already given some pointers on that. Or any ideas or initiatives we've been discussing today, whatever you want to say in closing.
Sure. Look, if people would like to explore more about national integrated planning and reporting, then please feel free to browse the ACFP website and sign up to the State of Australia on Substack, which is my Substack column, to hear the latest. We keep that regularly stocked with information that people need to build a better Australia. So anyone with ideas about how we can get specific collaborations of communities going is also welcome to contact ACFP via email at our email address is info@austcfp.com.au. You can even make submissions to include targets and strategies in the forthcoming issues of Australia Together. We regularly revise Australia Together. In fact, the one that's on the website at the moment is the 9th issue. It's getting bigger and bigger as time goes by, and I'm sure it will get bigger as people add ideas into the plan. The draft has grown over time, and we expect that future drafts will contain more and more effective strategies that will help us realise the vision of the plan if they're implemented, of course. We'll probably be bringing out another update on the draft plan before the end of this year. It's a starting draft plan, but it's you can see that it is arcing as hard as possible towards achieving the vision for Australia Together. So all suggestions will be gratefully accepted. There are forms you can fill out on the site to make suggestions. If you want to comment on the vision and directions of Australia Together, so that's those safe paths towards the vision, surveys are always open. They're permanently open on the ACFP website. We're trying to make it all as interactive as possible within the limits of our resources, which are extremely small. ACFP is all about making it easy for Australians to become involved in national integrated planning. So please check out the website. And if there are other types of help you think you can provide, please let us know. I mean, this doesn't mean, by the way, that we are asking for money. ACFP neither accepts nor seeks donations. So we don't even have a bank account. So no, we're not looking for money. Money is going to be an incredible distraction that we're not keen on at the moment. Involvement is all about participating as volunteers. So we're here solely to make that as easy as we can, and we think we've got the lucky chance in our lives of retirement to be able to make that possible for Australians. You know, I'm not dead yet, so we can do something.
What an inspiring way to round off today's conversation, Bronwyn. I mean, tons of practical, as I'd fully expect from having talked to you in this episode, tons of practical, hands-on activities to do there for listeners to get involved directly with the work of your initiative or to refer to it for inspiration. But anyway, you've shared such thoughtful, stimulating ideas about how to advance a better possible Australia, one founded on creating citizen collaborative national government and community design development roadmaps, a truly democratic set of directions and signposts which could take us along flourishing, not failing development pathways into the years ahead. A move toward better possible futures that many of us so long for ourselves and for the generations to follow us. So, Bronwyn, it just remains for me on behalf of the Imagining 2040 podcast series auspice organisation, that is Householders Options to Protect the Environment, dear old Hope Incorporated Australia, to say a big thank you to you for your thought-provoking comments today. You've certainly given me, and I know for a fact many other listeners, plenty to reflect on.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to have the opportunity. Cheers.
I was really inspired by my conversation with Dr. Bronwyn Kelly, based around a solidly anchored vision of the ACFP, the Australian Community Futures Planning Initiative. A vision that Australia can create fairer, safer and more ecologically grounded futures if only ordinary people, everyday citizens, have a direct role in working with national government to help shape the required long-term planning and strategic decision-making required to achieve such flourishing futures. I was also taken with the reminder that across decades of national surveys, public submissions, community panels, election analyses, everyday Australian citizens have been strikingly consistent about what they want their national governments to prioritise. They want serious action on climate disruption, not symbolic commitments. They want nature protected in a way that matches the scale of ecological loss, not a developer's charter. They want housing treated as a social foundation, not a speculative commodity. They want a fairer economic system that shares national prosperity rather than concentrating it into ever fewer hands. And above all, they want a political system that listens to them and treats them as partners in the work of governing, not as an audience. And some of those same Australian citizens have been guests in this very podcast series and have made the very same points to us during interview. So there is a truly democratic mandate from Australia's people. And the great value of Dr. Kelly's work at ACFP is that she and her colleagues have understood that the long-standing and eminently reasonable citizen aspirations and hopes for a better Australia and how they could be achieved are not naive, utopian, or politically impossible. She and her colleagues have described many credible ways in which such grassroots perspectives could and should be brought into national government and given full, not tokenistic, consideration. It was also great to hear of those subnational signals of the future, pointing us toward the opportunities to achieve national citizen collaborative democracy, to hear that integrated planning and reporting frameworks already exist, at least on paper, in some state and local government jurisdictions around the country. That is obviously a great foundation from which to build to the national level. So, what if federal long-term planning, Climate budgets, housing strategies and economic frameworks were co-designed with citizens, using the same evidence-based, deliberative and integrated methods already proven at smaller scales. Overall, my interview with Bronwyn Kelly was an absolute goldmine of visionary progressive ideas to improve our national democracy in the service of a better Australia in the years ahead. Whether we were talking about the potential to create public government collaborative forums at a national level, or about her rejection of narrow, neoliberal, can't-do framings of money, budgets and taxation. Across those topics, she helped provide a crucial framing for me. She helped me to see that a flourishing future requires not just better ideas, but better governance architecture. Based upon their past expressions, many Australian citizens already know the kind of future they want. The missing piece is a system that allows their collective intelligence to shape long-term national choices. So they are some of the key points I shall take away from my discussion with Dr. Bronwyn Kelly. But what about you, our listeners, our digital community of visionary thinkers? What ideas and inspiration will you take away from today's imaginative conversation? What ideas to create plausible pathways into better possible futures came up for you? Each episode invites you to join this podcasting experiment in future visioning, invites you to start asking your own future vision questions and using your imagination to help come up with answers. For instance, you might ask yourself and others, what could a flourishing 2040 look like for you and those around you? Or, how might our podcast imaginative exercises, time travel, signals of the future, and taking progressive, citizen-allied actions help you reflect and communicate your hopes for better tomorrows? And if you're enjoying the series, please share it. Word of mouth will help grow our audience and could help build a community committed to pushing for flourishing futures. Also, we'd love to hear from you. What resonated or challenged you? What new topics should we cover? Send your thoughts via podcast reviews, voice message, email, or social media. Contact details are in the episode show notes and on the Hope Incorporated Australia website. So, until next time, keep your imaginations alive. Keep wearing your flourishing futures hats and keep sharing ideas about how, together, we can imagine credible, flourishing development pathways toward a thriving 2040 and beyond, and in solidarity, push to make them real. My name is Andrew Nicholson, host of Imagining 2040, and thanks so much for listening. Householders' Options to Protect the Environment, Hope Incorporated Australia, providing podcasts, research and community educational outreach to help achieve our future vision of a society which is genuinely sustainable, climate safer, properly nature protected, more socially supportive and economically fair. For more details on our work, please visit our website at www.hopeaustralia.org.au.